During the earliest days of the Horus Heresy, following the revelation that Horus Lupercal, the War Master of the Imperium, had instigated a rebellion against the Emperor of Mankind, the Raven Guard would be one of 7 legions that were dispatched to the world of Istvan V in order to quash the War Master's rebellion before it could grow in momentum. This conflict upon Istvan, which became infamously known as the Dropsite Massacre, saw 4 of the 7 legions that were sent to battle against the traitors declaring themselves for Horus. This treachery would result in the decimation and near total annihilation of the Loyalist Salamander, Iron Hand, and Raven Guard legions, as well as the death of the Iron Hand's Primarch, Ferrus Manus. Thanks to the timely arrival of a Raven Guard battle barge commanded by Bran Nev, Corvus Corax, the Primarch of the Raven Guard, along with a small number of his Gene Sons, would successfully escape from the Istvan system, despite a brief pursuit from the traitors. The Primarch would then set course for Terra in hopes of convincing the Emperor to aid him in rebuilding his legion, which by this point had lost over 90% of its warriors. The Emperor, using the body of Malcador the Sigillite as a conduit, would bestow Corax with the location to one of his hidden laboratories, which contained within it the means necessary for the Primarch to swiftly replenish his losses. After safely traversing the installation's ever-shifting corridors and bypassing its automated defenses, Corax would obtain samples of pure and untainted Primarch genetic material, as well as a series of data logs that could harness its untapped potential. Now equipped with the means to restore the Raven Guard to full strength, Corax would return to his Legion's stronghold upon the Moon of Deliverance in order to begin his work. This venture would become known within Imperial records as the Raptor Project. These Raptors would not only prove to be larger and stronger than a typical Astartes, but they could also be produced extremely quickly, as such recruits could be deemed battle-ready in just a matter of weeks. The only trait that these Raptors lacked when compared to other Astartes was simply their inexperience upon the battlefield. In essence, these warriors that were created through the Raptor Project could arguably be seen as the prototype for the modern-day Primaris Marines. Bran Nev, who had coined the term Raptor, would be appointed by his Primarch to act as the commanding officer for these new Astartes. This initial batch of Raptors would prove to be an exceptionally potent if somewhat tactically naive force in combat, as they would exceed all expectations during their first combat engagement, successfully destroying a Word-Bearer's outpost upon the moon of Cruciax. Despite the Raven Guard now having the means to not only rebuild their legion, but do so rapidly with an even more effective fighting force, the Raptor Project would ultimately be sabotaged. A cadre of Alpha Legion agents, which had infiltrated the ranks of the Raven Guard, would obtain much of the gene tech being utilized in the creation of the Raptors for themselves, before contaminating the rest with a poison that had been derived from demon blood. This would result in many Raptors becoming transformed into twisted, shambling monstrosities. Despite their hideous mutations, Corax would declare that these creatures were still Raven Guard, and allowed the now mutated Raptors the chance to continue fighting in the Emperor's name. Over time, however, the mutations afflicting the Raptors would begin to grow more and more extreme, with some becoming little more than mindless beasts, forcing the Raven Guard to lock them away within the dungeons upon deliverance. Following the conclusion of the Horus Heresy, Corax swore a vow to destroy every single creature that had been tainted by chaos, and with tears in his eyes, the Primarch would put each of the surviving Raptors out of their misery. But what if the Alpha Legion failed to sabotage the Raptor Project? What could have happened if Corvus Corax was able to rebuild his legion with these enhanced Astartes? The most obvious difference would be that the Raven Guard would have been able to rapidly replenish their numbers following the events of the Dropsite Massacre. While the Legion may have initially been forced to lay low, or restricted to enacting a guerrilla war against the traitor legions for several months, given enough time, the Raven Guard would have become strong enough to challenge Horus's forces in prolonged engagements. In fact, given how rapidly the Raptors could be created, the Raven Guard could potentially whittle their foes down through sheer attrition alone, should the Legion be able to obtain a sufficient number of recruits to participate in the Raptor Project. Naturally, this could also grant the Raven Guard an opportunity to make the journey to Terra in order to help reinforce the world prior to the War Master's siege, giving the Loyalists an additional legion with which to bolster their defences, should the tides of the warp prove favourable. Should such an event occur, then Corax could have even accompanied the Emperor, Rogel Dawn, and Sanguinius as they teleported aboard Horus's flagship, the Vengeful Spirit. Corax's presence upon the ship could potentially have prevented either Sanguinius from being struck down, or the Emperor from being mortally wounded by the War Master, although it is just as likely that Corax himself could have been slain. But even then, it is equally possible that Corax would be unable to reach the bridge in time in order to aid his brother or the Emperor in their respective battles against Horus. But again, it is just as likely that Corax may have remained upon Terra in order to help coordinate its defences, alongside his brother, Jagatai Khan. Alternatively, should the Raven Guard be unable to reach Terra prior to the beginning of the siege, then the Legion could instead launch an assault upon Horus's rearguard should they manage to arrive during the course of the battle, prior to when Rabute Gilliman and his Ultramarines Legion transitioned into the Sol system. If this were the case, then Horus would be faced with a dilemma: to either ignore Corax's forces, hoping that the Word-Bearers would be able to keep them at bay long enough for his attack to succeed, or divert more of his forces in an attempt to keep the Raven Guard from reaching Terra, resulting in the War Master having a reduced number of troops with which to work with. However, even then, this depends on whether or not Corax would choose to travel back to Terra immediately after rebuilding his Legion, or if the Primarch instead decided to embark on a campaign of vengeance in retaliation for the events that occurred upon Istvan V. But even if Corax did intend to reinforce Terra with a newly reconstructed Legion, there would still be a potential possibility, given the inherent unpredictability of warp travel, that the Raven Guard may not even reach the world in time, which in turn would make little difference to the outcome of the siege. Depending on how much time the Raven Guard had to rebuild their Legion prior to the onset of the Siege of Terra, then there is the potential prospect that Corax would have attempted to gift a number of his Loyalist brothers with his Raptor gene tech. This would not only allow the Loyalist legions to replenish their losses at an accelerated rate, much like how the Raven Guard themselves were able to do so, but to do so with warriors that are larger, stronger, and potentially more durable than those found within the traitor legions. Not only that, but this specific method of rapid recruitment could potentially prevent certain gene seed stocks from having their particular flaws exacerbated. The second edition Ultramarines Codex details that the main reason as to why so many flaws exist within the genetic stock of so many modern-day Space Marine chapters is due to the process of accelerated gene seed cultivation techniques employed by the legions during the Horus Heresy, in order to replenish their losses as quickly as possible. Since the unique genetic cultivation process of the Raptors is designed to be done so at a rate beyond that of traditional gene seed, the likelihood of Raptor gene seed exacerbating any pre-existent flaws would theoretically be non-existent, although admittedly not impossible. This would also mean that unless the traitors increased their own rate of recruitment to compensate for this new advantage held by many of the Loyalist legions, then it is likely that they could have been defeated at an even faster rate, potentially even prior to the onset of the siege itself. However, this does not rule out the potential risks of such gene tech being intercepted and subsequently utilized by the traitor legions. Ultimately, these Raptor Marines could eventually phase out the more traditional baseline Astartes altogether, although it remains unclear as to whether these older Space Marines could theoretically be upgraded into a Raptor at a later point in time, similar to how baseline Astartes can become transformed into a Primaris. This then leads to another question. If the more traditional Astartes are phased out in favour of Raptor Marines, then what would such a development mean in regards to Rabute Guilliman's Primaris project? While Raptor Marines may be more physically imposing than a baseline Astartes, it would appear that Raptors lack any sort of additional organs such as those found within the Primaris genome, the Belisarian Furnace, Magnificat, and Sinew Coils. As such, it seems likely that should the Primaris project still be undertaken, they themselves would eventually replace the Raptors. That being said, however, if this particular version of the Primaris project utilized the genetic sequence of the Raptors as its foundation, then could it be possible that the resulting Astartes created in this manner be in actuality superior to those that were based upon the original Astartes template? Ultimately, we will never know. What do you think? Leave a comment below, and thanks for watching.